we're gonna be a star. Today we're talking about a classic to my collection, a classic as a film, and certainly a classic as a film score. This is Verez Saraband's 2003 Club Limited Edition to Magic. Now this is a terrific score. I've been familiar with this soundtrack for, well, since 2003 when this club title came out, and this takes us back to the days when Verez used to announce their club titles at the stroke of midnight, and it would be the unmasking ceremony. I remember reloading my internet browser at 11:58, 11:59, midnight, because you didn't want to be shuffling your feet at the door in those days, because there were certain titles that would launch and within 5-10 minutes they'd sell out, half hour, and you just did not have time to mess around. So I was there and prepped, primed, and ready, and Jerry Goldsmith's Magic was one of those club titles announced at the stroke of midnight, and I have been a huge fan ever since. I bought it blind, and I've bought so many soundtracks blind, and by that I mean I hadn't seen the movie and I had no context for what the music was going to sound like, except for perhaps the name, in this case Jerry Goldsmith. I knew that I was going to get a great film score from Jerry Goldsmith no matter what, and this definitely is no exception. This is a very special score, and I think all around, now having finally seen Magic just recently, that this is an underrated project, both musically and as a film. I'm Ted the Soundtrack Guy. Stick with me until the end of this video, and I'll be discussing another soundtrack by the great Jerry Goldsmith, in which he scores for another psychotic character. I found Magic as a movie to be a surprisingly strong and interesting little psychological horror drama. This stars Anthony Hopkins and Margaret and Burgess Meredith, and they all give really fantastic performances. In particular, Anthony Hopkins and Burgess Meredith. Now, Anthony Hopkins not only plays Corki, but he plays the ventriloquist doll that he uses, whose name is Fats. And I found his performance to be particularly fascinating and very, very difficult to pull off. In fact, I think this entire project was tough to pull off. This is one of those movies that to me just seems kind of like it had so many opportunities to fail and so many opportunities to not work right from the ground up. But somehow it actually worked surprisingly well. And to further illustrate what I'm saying about the talent that's showcased in this movie, Anthony Hopkins was nominated both for a Golden Globe and for a BAFTA award as the lead actor, and Burgess Meredith actually won the Saturn Award for Best Supporting Actor. And not to mention, the Jerry Goldsmith music that is featured in this movie is one of the best Goldsmith nuggets in his expansive discography. All around, this movie was pretty tense and had this dreadful feeling kind of percolating under every single scene. This was actually kind of a playground for Jerry Goldsmith and his talents and his darker sensibilities, especially the 1978 Jerry Goldsmith, which was when this movie came out. The one thing that I have to protest is that in researching this movie and its awards, Jerry Goldsmith was not nominated by the Academy Awards at all for this particular score, and that's crazy to me, because this is a very intelligent, very thoughtful score that is so fine-tuned. It's small scale, it's a rather intimate score, but it leaves a mark. You hear this music, people that love film music in particular, it immediately catches your ear, and you never forget it. I won't say you don't soon forget it, you never forget the music that is in this movie. But let's talk a little bit about Verez Saraband's 2003 Club Limited Edition for this wonderful soundtrack. This soundtrack has 22 tracks total, coming in around 41 minutes of music, and 2 of those 22 tracks are considered source music, but Jerry Goldsmith himself actually wrote these particular tracks for the nightclub scenes that take place toward the beginning of the movie. Now, I should also note that La La Land Records also released this soundtrack in 2015 as a remastered and slightly expanded edition of 2,000 copies. Now, I missed out on that particular album, but in my defense, the one missing track is track 2, We're Gonna Be a Star, and it actually is only about 25 seconds long. So it's not like I'm missing too much. The remastering is probably as enhanced as it can be, but the Verez album has incredibly crisp and clear and punchy sound as it is, so I don't imagine it's that much of a difference. Overall, this score is very nervy and intense. It's a very poignant character study. Jerry Goldsmith excels when it comes to character-driven music, and Corki is of course on display here, along with his ventriloquist doll, and together they inspired Jerry Goldsmith to create a really disturbing and also very beautiful and at times heart-achingly lonely score to this very special little horror film. And speaking of horror, it definitely delivers on that front. It's the character that actually is the scary element here. There are some gruesome moments, a couple of chilling murder scenes in this movie, but overall, the reason that your hair stands on end occasionally, the reason that your stomach is in knots, the reason that this movie makes you uncomfortable is because of Corki and his unstable mental state and how he's crumbling mentally and unraveling this entire time. And the music does such a fabulous job of delineating that progression. Instrumentally, one of the standout instruments, and a particularly rare instrument, I would say, is the harmonica that's used in this score that represents the dummy, Fats. And it kind of gives the score sort of a carnival feel, just ever so slightly, just this uneasy, nervy carnival feel that kind of offsets you, and it is used throughout the entire score and to wonderful effect. It's also in the main title, which I would say is easily one of the best tracks on the entire score. The main title has the harmonica there, along with strings that, even though it's a smaller ensemble of strings, it's very lush and beautiful sounding, as well as, again, lonely. It's pierced with this sadness and this tragedy from the outset. The very next track is another highlight track, another one of my favorites, called Corki's Retreat, and according to the liner notes, it's aggressive and feverish and slightly Herman-esque. And of course, every film music lover knows what he means by Herman-esque. He's talking about Bernard Herrmann, probably in particular the scores that he produced for Alfred Hitchcock. And I just thought that that was a particularly apt statement for this track. And there are other places throughout this score that I would say are Herman-esque, that kind of have sort of this psycho flavoring in a way, which is also very appropriate considering who Corki is and what's happening to his mental state this entire time. This track, once again, is haunting and lush, yet intimate. And there's intensity in it too. There's intensity in almost every single one of these tracks, no matter how subtle, no matter how soft and delicate it tends to be, there's this intensity there. But on this particular track, it's really noteworthy, and it starts off kind of fiercely too with this, and it has this wonderful use of, again, the harmonica, as well as a solo cello moment and xylophone. The xylophone really is noticeable in this particular track, and it also is used occasionally throughout the score, and I think is another way that Goldsmith is kind of representing Fats and kind of this carnival, magic, sleight of hand feel. Yet another standout track. There are so many on this album. Let's just say they're all standout tracks. But another standout track is a track called the Pionatada, and it's when Corki ends up making love to his high school sweetheart, and it's just this particularly beautiful version of the theme that actually is taken a certain direction that it never quite gets to go in any other context in this score. But all that lush beauty is interrupted at a certain point by Fatz's motif on harmonica. You see him in the other room, sitting on the chair and kind of staring toward the open bedroom door as the festivities are going on in the bedroom, so to speak. And it gives you this really creepy, upsetting kind of juxtaposition to the beauty of that scene. It actually kind of makes me think of that scene in Hellraiser where Christopher Young's incredible score is doing a similar thing in a different way. Of course, there are different colors in this comparison, but the shadings are similar, where when Frank and Julia are having their affair moment, there is just this passion where the music is just ravishing and beautiful, but threaded with this doomed kind of dark intensity. And of course, this whole time, Corki the neurotic, he's having his mental breakdown and he's descending and he's going further and further and further into this place of madness. And the track Stop the Postman is really where things get exceptionally unhinged. It's this quietly anxious track leading up to the moment when Corki takes the dummy and bludgeons to death his agent while he's in the woods. And it plays in silence, that particular murder scene, but later on, it leads up to this scary moment in the lake when Corki is swimming out into the middle of the lake and he's got Ben Green, his agent, and he's planning on weighting him down. But as he's swimming away with the body, you can kind of see in the cabin window there, Fats, the doll, sitting there and watching, and you hear that harmonica like growl. It's like this. It's just, I love it when Goldsmith gets kind of experimental with his instruments. It's just, he always comes up with some of the most incredible and effective ideas, as unique as they are. And at one point, of course, Corki's agent actually wakes up, comes to. He hasn't been killed. And that's when Goldsmith comes in with his murder motif, which is just chilling music. Just the slashing strings, blood curdling, loud and fierce and violent. It's just that tipping point where you have finally seen Corki just totally overcome by the part of him that is Fats. And The Lake is the title of that track that I was just describing to you, unsurprisingly. And now that I think about it, that growling harmonica effect is in the previous track, Stop the Postman, but the harmonica is also featured in the Lake track, along with these plucking strings. They're kind of this bum, 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 bum. And the strings are kind of back there real subtly as they're drifting across the water. And when you see Fats in the window, you hear the harmonica kind of pulsing along with the plucking strings. It's just a great effect. And then continuing from there and continuing with the murder, Duke's Catch is kind of this prelude track to revisiting to the murder motif. And in Duke's Catch, you kind of have this simple little piano key hit over and over again as the strings sort of off the tail end of these piano notes, just the same notes, just boom, boom, down, down, down. I love Goldsmith and the stuff that he does for intensity and horror and psychological fractured characters. It's just so great. But then when Corki is hiding behind the curtain and he uses Fats to stab Duke to death, and that track hits you, just talk about slashing strings. It just, from the second go, it's just it's just at your throat. Really, really scary stuff, really effective stuff. And from there, it's kind of a downward spiral into what's perhaps even scarier than the murder sequences in this movie, and that is seeing the total unraveling of Corki. Because what's really fascinating to me about this particular movie is why I was invested in Corki's character and why I cared what was going to happen to him. Because if you think about it, like, there aren't too many redeeming qualities that this guy has. I mean, he's obviously losing his mind. He is neurotic. He ends up having an affair with, of course, it's his high school sweetheart. But I think the character is so tragic, and there's this sadness surrounding him, and Anthony Hopkins somehow pulls this off. Just an incredible performance that despite all of this, you do care about Corki, and it's horrifying to see what ends up happening to him. And in the aptly named track Fats Blows the Whistle, that is probably the point at which Corki is completely unhinged and there's no coming back from this. This is a really aggressive but slightly understated track, and it kind of builds really, really slowly, and then becomes more and more and more intense, faster and faster and faster, until it reaches sort of this climactic moment and then just cuts, stops. And then you go into the next track. And that takes us into the deep heartbreak of the track called The Wooden Heart, where Corki has carved this little wooden heart for Peggy and left it at the door to kind of lure her out of the space in order to initially kill her, but then snap cut to the next scene and he drops the bloody knife on the cabin floor, and you realize that he's actually stabbed himself to stop himself from killing the woman that he loves and to put himself away for this unstoppable madness that has clutched him. And that moves into the track Us Was You, and that's when the tragedy, the heartbreak, and the quiet horror of this entire situation really hits home. And it's an oddly moving moment in a way, and I don't mean that you're going to be brought to tears, but you definitely feel the depth of this poor man's tragic life. And then finally, the track and titles brings us back full circle to another version of the main title theme, but this time it's a little bit more delicate. This time it's a little bit more tranquil, and closes us off on almost a sweet note on strings and piano, and then moves into the two bonus tracks that I briefly mentioned at the beginning of this video, the source cues. If you want a boogie disco style to Jerry Goldsmith's main theme for Magic, you've got it here. The track Previous Act is probably the more fun of the two tracks, but they're both good because, again, you get this disco boogie version of the main title. It's really good stuff. Make sure you're wearing your Verez Saraband t-shirt when you start boogieing down, because otherwise you're doing it wrong. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be pointing you to a video where I discuss another soundtrack that Jerry Goldsmith wrote, where one of the key players in the film is another psycho, and he carries some very, very chilling music himself in a different vein. Check out that video right here. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Ted, the soundtrack guy. I'll see you next time, and in the meantime, happy listening.